Hi everybody, welcome to another AstroExploring video. In this video I'm going to go over how to stack your astrophotography images and calibration files in DeepSkyStacker. The version that I'm using here is version 4.2.0 and you'll find a link to this software in the description down below. It's a completely free bit of software, so that's great. I'm going to show you how to stack your images, talk a little bit about why that's important, and also just give a brief explanation about the calibration frames, what each of them are and why we use them for astrophotography. Really quickly before we get started, if you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification so that you never miss another upload. I also just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone that subscribed to the channel. I put my first video up on the 30th of December and I've just this morning reached 101 subscribers, so thanks so much for everybody that has already subscribed to the channel. So the image that I'm going to be stacking today is one that I took a few weeks ago of the Andromeda Galaxy. We are currently being battered by a storm here in the UK, and so I thought what better way to spend a Sunday afternoon than to do some image processing. So I've not been able to get out for a couple of weeks because of the weather, so I'm just going to reprocess some old data. So why do we stack images in astrophotography? So if I could just show you a single exposure of the Andromeda Galaxy that I took the other week, and you'll see that I've already processed this a couple of times. So this is a single image, a 2-minute exposure at ISO 1600, and you can see that this picture is quite noisy. There's a good amount of data there, but there's a lot more noise in this image than I would like. So what we do in astrophotography is we take long exposures. This one was 2 minutes long, at quite a high ISO 1600. And recording images at these sorts of settings will generate a lot of noise in your image. So obviously we don't want that, because we want as clean an image as possible, which is why we take as many frames as we can. I think I only actually managed to take about 37. Yeah, I've got 37 images, and you can see here that they are quite noisy. Some of them aren't particularly great at all, but that's what I've got, so that's what we'll work with. So I'm going to go ahead and open my picture files. So these are the ones that I want, 37 of those. So I'm going to open those, and you'll see here that because I've processed them before, it sort of gives them a score and counts the number of stars, but it also gives you the details of the image, so ISO 1600 and the exposure time, etc. So dark files. So why do we use dark files in astrophotography? So darks are basically just a pure noise image. What I mean by that is your darks will be the same exposure and ISO as your light frames or picture frames, but you'll have the lens cap on and you'll cover the viewfinder so that you can't get any light to the sensor. So you're going to take an image that is basically all noise and no signal. So what that means is that when you're stacking your images in DeepSkyStacker, it can generate a master dark file, and it will generate that master file that's generated will be nothing but noise. And what it's able to do is it's able to reduce the noise in your final stacked image by subtracting the noise from your master dark file from each of your light files, if that makes sense. So I'll go ahead and open these. I don't have as many of these as I would want. I think there's only 16 of those. Yeah, 16 of those. I'd recommend shooting 20, maybe 30 of these, but equally it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when I was shooting these, and I wanted to go to bed. So I've only got 16 flat files. So what flats will do is they will produce a nice, and it's going to sound really obvious when I say this, a nice flat field across your images. So it will remove any gradient and also any dust spots that's on your camera sensor. So you'll see in a lot of images that there'll be a lot of gradient, and what I mean by that is that the light will be different across the image. So you'll have maybe the left hand side will be, say, really dark black, and the right hand side might be quite a light grey, and that's the gradient going across the image, which is why when you're taking your flat frames, it's really important to create a completely even field of light across the aperture. So I'm going to go ahead and open those. If anything, I think these are probably slightly overexposed looking at those, but we'll add them. Okay, so bias frames, this is a flat frame by the way. Your bias frames, they are taken to remove the fixed noise that's generated by the camera every time it takes a picture. So if you think it's an electrical device with circuit boards, it's gonna generate some sort of noise. So bias frames are taken at the same ISO setting, but taken on the fastest exposure time possible for your camera. So on my camera, that's 1/4000th of a second, and by taking it on the fastest exposure possible, that just means that you're not allowing any other type of noise to be generated in that image. It is purely going to capture the image that's generated by the camera for things like dark currents, for example. And I've taken 50 of these, so we're going to select all those and add them in. So I haven't checked off my lights, which is why that says 0. So check all. So I've got light frames 37. Dark frames is 14. I'd normally have at least 20 in there. Flat frames 30. That seems to be a good amount for me. I've messed around between sort of 20 and 30, and 30 seems to be good. And bias frames 50. And to be honest, the more you have of these, the better. But there is of course a sort of limit where capturing more doesn't offer any real value, if that makes sense. So you're trying to capture as many of these as possible to create as good a master file as possible when it subtracts those from the light frames. So you'll have a master dark frame, a master flat frame, and a master bias frame, and all of those will get subtracted from your final image. But in my mind, there's no point taking, say, 200 dark frames, because you'll have captured enough of a pattern in 20 dark frames to be able to create a good master file. And so taking 200 is not only a waste of time and shutter count, but it's not really going to offer you any further value than what 20 would. And it's also important to mention that when you're adding your light frames, it's important to go through them beforehand, just to have a look. You might have some satellite trails or plane trails going through your images, or maybe there was a slight gust of wind or a cloud came over or something like that, just so that you know that you're stacking only the best images that you've got, and then that way you'll come up with the best image possible at the end. So from here we've got all of our files checked, so we now go to register stacked pictures, and this banner here is green because I'm using darks, flats and bias. So if I was only using darks, this would be red, to indicate that you should use more than just darks as calibration files. So you want to see this as green, because that means it's going to produce the best possible image for you. This is ticked because I've already registered these before. I leave automatic detection of hot pixels ticked, and after I've registered the pictures, I want to stack them. So the registering is going to be what gives them the scores, which has now got NA against them all. and after that I want to stack them automatically. And in the advanced setting, so you can compute the number of detected stars, and what that's going to do is it's going to choose your first light frame, and it's just going to count the number of stars. So I try and keep it a sort of between 200 and 250 for a couple of reasons. One, if you're doing more than that, it's going to take a lot longer to process. The more stars that it has to count between each picture, obviously the longer it takes to process each picture. And again, there comes a time when you're not really adding much value by selecting, say, 1,000 stars, because it's just going to take forever to process, and you don't need that many for it to be able to stack the images. So I will adjust this threshold to where it sort of might need to be for that. So I'll just hit compute the number of detected stars and see where that, okay, so that's going to be too many. So we don't need 601 stars. When I first started doing this, I would leave this set at 10%, and it would literally capture about 1,200 stars, but it would take about half an hour to process the picture, and it just wasn't really necessary. You get just as good pictures by doing it this way. So if I bump that up to 65, I think that'll do. That's fine. So from there we can then look at the recommended settings. So okay, yeah. So this will recommend settings based on the information that you've got. So we can ignore most of this because it's all default anyway. For my light frames, I always leave it on sigma clipping rather than the auto adaptive weighted average. No particular reason. I think that's just a default one, so I've left it at that. Because I'm only using 14 frames, it's recommending that I use the median combination method rather than sigma clipping, which is what I would normally use, but I'm just going to leave that. So all of these settings that you'll see here are default, and what you'll see, if I were to click that, it would just change to say that I'm using the correct method, which is what these ones are all saying. So we'll just hit OK on that. Stacking parameters. So this is in standard mode. All of these images were taken during the same session on the same night, so I don't need to select any other type of mode. If you were doing them over, say, several nights and capturing data in different narrowband channels, then you would want to select mosaic mode or something like that. But we don't need to do that for this. And then the light frame. So this is where you can change all of these settings. So you can see this is on kappa sigma clipping, and everything that you'll see in here is as per the default. I've played around with these settings, but I find that the default settings gives me the best results. I guess that's because the person that wrote the software knows what they're doing. Alignment, I just leave that as automatic because I don't need it to be anything else. And what you'll see over here on the output is create an output file. It will call that file autosave.tiff, and if you create more than one, like you can see that I have here, so this will save as autosave 003 because it just counts up each time you save a new one. And I set mine to create the output file in the folder of the reference frames, so it will save the output file in the same folder that it got the light frames from, and we can hit OK on that and hit OK. So this is now saying that it's going to be 1 hour 15-ish minutes. I've selected it to do the best 85% of my images, which means that it's going to not use a few of my images, and I'm fine with that because these images aren't perfect anyway. If you wanted it to use all of your images, you could set that to 100% if you had brilliant images, but I certainly wouldn't recommend really going over 95%. just so that you can get the best image possible. So what that means is that integration time will probably come down to about an hour by the time that it's finished stacking. So this is then just an overview of all the settings that we've selected, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And that is now going to register all of these pictures in turn. It's going to count the stars. Okay, so it's just going through and registering all the pictures now. I had to go back and change my star detection threshold from 65%, which is high. I've never used it that high before, but that's because my first image is by far my best image. So it counted the number of stars in that. I've moved it down to 25%. So it was counting about sort of 700 to 800 in my first image. But now you can see on these images it's counting sort of about 400, which is still quite high, but it's a lot better than it was. When it got to the end, it was only counting 3 or 4 stars, so I stopped that and had to go back before it stacked them. So this process is now going to take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to do all this. If you had more images, obviously the longer it would take, but it's a good time to just kick back with a cup of tea or a beer. So I'll just pause the video here while it finishes registering and then stacking all of these images, and we'll come back once it's finished that process. Okay, so it's just finished stacking now. It's just creating the final picture, and then we will see what that looks like. It's going to load that in DeepSkyStacker here, and it's kind of like a catchphrase for anybody in the UK that's old enough to remember that program, where it just reveals 1 square at a time, and it takes ages. From here you can make adjustments to your image, but I don't recommend it, and certainly if you look over the DeepSkyStacker website, which has got some really good information on it, it's not recommended that you do any adjustments in DeepSkyStacker to your image. These are purely here to show you what data is in the image. So what you would do now is you would take this image over to your image processing software of choice. I use Adobe Photoshop. That's just the one that I've used and gotten used to. I know that some people will use GIMP or APP or PixInsight, but whatever you feel comfortable with. There isn't a right and wrong bit of software to use. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. So you can see now that the image is loaded properly, that we've got a much cleaner image, and you can see more detail of Andromeda in this picture. There's some sort of stacking artifacts down here, but that's okay because you can just crop that out in Photoshop. So you can see from here that image, there's nowhere near as much noise, but obviously it's still not particularly a great image. You can see the power of stacking, because this is where we've ended up, which is a nice image of Andromeda, albeit that's only an hour's worth of data with no light pollution filters on an unmodified DSLR, so I'm pretty happy with that. But you can see where we started. So this is where we started. That is one of my individual frames. So we went from that to that, which the detail that you can see of Andromeda is still about the same, but it is a much cleaner image, which allows you to then pull out all of this detail. And I'm really pleased with that. For only an hour's worth of data, I'm absolutely over the moon with that. So leave a comment down below, let me know what you think, and if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, feel free to share some of your Andromeda images with me so that we can all have a look at those as well. And to those of you who are inevitably going to ask me in the comments down below to do you a Photoshop tutorial, I don't really feel like I'm at the stage where I can offer a Photoshop tutorial. Trevor from Astro Backyard's got some absolutely brilliant video tutorials, and he's also on his website, I think he's got like a PDF download that you can get for something like 25 Canadian dollars. I'd recommend doing that because you've all seen his images and they're absolutely incredible. I don't feel like I'm at the stage where I can share much information about Photoshop with you, especially as because I've been following his guide. So if yeah, if you're happy with the images that you see that I've taken, that's because my image processing has come from Trevor's knowledge. So I'd suggest looking at his tutorials before mine. I'm Nick, and this is AstroExploring. Thanks for watching.